Hello everybody. In the interest of starting on time, and we'll let people come in, I would just like to get started with our Third Academy Parakia. And please excuse me, I am not very confident with this, so I'm slightly cheating, so somebody's speaking for me on here, and hopefully some of those others in the room that know it well can join in and make sure we can hear him. See, this is what happens when you whakarongo, whakarongo, kina ha'i mau I karahanai, tuia, tuia I luna, tuia I taro, tuia ki waho, tuia ki toko. Thank you for the assistance. I slightly cheated with slowing it down and knows it faster. One of the things we start with this because it is part of Third Academy and what we are about, that we wish to listen and we wish to know the voices of many people living with disabilities and hearing what is being said. It's important to us to weave this through all of that which we are doing and have that through understanding what's going before us and in the future, which is like drinking water. And it is part of what we are about at Third Academy. And my name is Rebecca Coons. I'm the General Manager here at Third Academy. I still feel very new to the role, although I've been for 7.5 months now. It still feels very new, so I'm learning, still lots. One of the things that brought me to the Academy and really enthused me was that aspect of actually listening to what was important to people living with disability or lifelong health conditions. And those aspects come through in all of the research that we do and the collaborations and the conversations that we want to be having. And today we have Tom join us and I can't remember. Nick, who are from the Enabling Good Lives Christchurch. And the little bit of story I've got here about Tom is he has lived his life in Christchurch in Aotearoa. He has been in a wheelchair for some time. He was born with spina bifida. He's experienced some mainstream opportunities and through sport, university, employment. But one of the things that he is keen to be looking at is enabling others and many others with disabilities to have those sorts of opportunities. And he's going to talk a bit more about Enabling Good Lives Christchurch, but he's the community development team leader there. And I'll let him talk a little more about what it is, but for those that don't know about Enabling Good Lives, there is 8 principles to it. He's got some paperwork to hand out if you've not already got some. Anyone miss the handout?
So kia ora koutou katoa, well Nick's setting up. Thank you for the introduction and thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. I've lived in Christchurch my whole life and I'm very familiar with the work, hopefully most of you or all of you do. With my own lived experience of disability, it's something I'm really passionate about. I have worked in the disability sector for 8 or 10 years, around about, with a disability provider, and in the last 18 months I've had the privilege of working as part of the Enabling Good Lives team here in Christchurch. So I'm joined here today with my colleague Nick.
Cool. Kia ora koutou everyone. My name is Nick and I am one of the budget advisor for the Enabling Good Life Christchurch team. So a little bit about myself. So I've been working for EGL for about 1.5 years. So prior to that, I was an admin. But what was really cool for me is prior to joining EGL, I was actually still am actually an EGL participant. So I'm legally blind. So if I introduce myself and I don't remember you, don't be offended. I always say this just because I struggle with faces and recognizing, just reading in general. But I got into this role sort of by accident. But my background is in psychology and stats, and that's what I study in my undergrad. So yeah, cool. Should we dive right into it?
Sure. And I think just in the interest of time, we might take questions at the end, just in case anyone's wondering. So Enabling Good Lives begins by setting the scene in 2011 when the Minister for Disability Issues at the time, Tariana Turia, commissioned a report into day services, which established consultation throughout the country from disabled people in whānau. And what came out of that report was that disabled people wanted more choice and control in their lives and more access to the same opportunities that everyone else, that all their peers had. And those that vision was the basis of the report that was then further commissioned to establish some principles, some guiding principles towards that vision, which which are essentially what started the ball rolling. And importantly here, when we talk about enabling good lives, it is for all disabled people in whānau. The vision and principles are something that all disabled people in whānau can practice and understand and follow. What we're about to talk about is our experience in terms of working with a portion of the disability community as a response to that vision and principles. But importantly, the vision and principles are what Enabling Good Lives really is. And we'll come back to the principles, which is what you've got in your handout here. So in response to that vision and principles, a small demonstration began in 2013 in Christchurch, and that's who we now work for. So in 2013, the idea was that we were funded to support high school students in their final year of high school, and they had to have OARS funding. So that's ongoing resource scheme funding, which is essentially to support disability needs while they're at school. So it was relatively small, but the essence was that disabled people in whānau had access to an independent connector that would get to know them and understand what they wanted from their future, develop some ideas and a bit of a plan in line with those principles about how a good life could develop for them. And the other element was a personal budget, which was essentially all the disability support funding the person was entitled to, all being converted into, rather than hours, dollars amount, and all being pulled together, so it could be used more flexibly in line with that vision. Since 2013, when that began, it's slowly changed here in Christchurch. We're still mainly focused on OARS funded high school students, but we're now able to engage with people from the age of 14. And since 2013, two other examples or prototypes of Enabling Good Lives have been developed in the North Island, essentially with the same idea of following the principles, but also with a connector and a personalised budget approach, just with different populations. And about 18 months ago, there was the announcement that of the intention for the Enabling Good Lives approach to be rolled out nationally. So we're very hopeful that soon we'll be able to support a much wider cohort of disabled people in whānau.
Just adding to that as well, each of the demonstration sites has like what Tom said, has a particular focus. So EGL Christchurch for us mainly focus on transitional students, so students that are transitioning out of adulthood. Mid Central focuses on the whole general population, and Waikato mainly Maori and Pacific. Cool. So enabling good life principle in our practices. So again, like what Tom said, EGL, it's an approach. It's not just a service delivery like most people think. So I thought it would be good to provide a couple examples of what that looks like for us in practice. And also just a bit of disclaimer as well. In practice, this is mainly catered for the people that we serve, which is around 800 participants. So how does that look like for them when we talk about EGL? So traditionally, when we talk about day services, disabled people, especially the high needs, by default, most of the time we send them to day services. That is the only option. But with greater choice and control, we can start to be a little bit more creative about it. So that could be things like, instead of just looking at day services, how can we incorporate that into mainstream employment? How can we look at, to think broader than just day services, which again, a lot of disabled people, it's the only choice. So think broader and also think about what they want to do as well. So that could be things like, if they want to start a business, a connector will work with them and look at, okay, how can we make this happen? If they want to get into mainstream employment, we look at what kind of support needs to be in place to make that happen. So that is that, and
so one of the other effects of the Enabling Good Lives approach has been people looking at where to live next and what opportunities are available. Traditionally, a lot of people were looking at residential care, even if their needs didn't necessarily require that type of support. We've seen a lot more opportunities for people to go flatting, to pull some of their flexible budget together to still meet their disability needs, but also retain most of their personal budget to their own individual needs, and I guess develop that flexibility so they're still choosing who they want to live with and develop those skills over time. So it's also offered the opportunity to develop the living skills along the way and have a lot more of those conversations early on, particularly with the connector and what that may look like. And I guess the other opportunity has been through greater choice on who your supports are. So if you wanted to employ your own supports, much like individualised funding, but I guess having the opportunity to, if you're wanting to join a gym, you can potentially look at someone from the gym and employ them as your support, rather than having a traditional support person who might turn up at a particular time and day and go with you. And I guess have that opportunity for the relationship building as well. We've also seen a lot more flexibility used by EGL participants around having different support workers for different needs as well, and I guess as needs change over time, changing those relationships as needed.
I think really ultimately it's just about choice and control and what does the disabled person want. So re-looking at how we deliver that rather than just giving them like these are the options, actually go into where they at, what do you want to try and achieve. Looking at some of the more aspirational stuff, especially when we talk about working with disabled people, we always look at, I guess, the medical model of disability, but we're trying to move away from that into a more social model of disability. And how does that look like? It's not the disability that makes them disabled, it's a society that makes them disabled. But part of the EGL approach is to challenge that notion a little bit. Yeah.
And I think I should have said before, when we're talking about our connectors, they can come and go as the disabled person in whānau wants. So if they don't require any assistance, then they're in the background. And so, as Nick said, we have supported over 800 people, but we're probably actively supporting around 500. And people will often re-engage with us later in life. So once you've started engaging with us in those teenage years, you have the Enabling Good Lives approach for the rest of your life. And so you can choose to re-engage at any point. So maybe that people have had support to leave home and then things are going well, so they don't require as much connection with the connector or kaitohono. But later in life it might be something else that they want to re-engage and talk about, and how, I guess, employment goals, for example, what that could look like. We just wanted to I guess, highlight a few of the current areas for the current population that we're serving. And some of the, I guess, the idea of enabling good lives being about a social movement, and so everyone plays a part in that. And so much of our work is also about engaging with community, I guess doing things like this so people understand how they could contribute to supporting good lives for all disabled people. So one of those key priority areas has been around employment, because that's a real high demand for the population we serve. We've been involved with Project Search, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, for a long time. We have practiced ourselves. We have a paid internship with Whaikaha here in Christchurch, Charlie, and we're looking to meet with as many employers and employment organisations as possible and look at how they can contribute to a more inclusive Canterbury. And not only employment opportunities, but self-employment, and many EGL participants have developed their interest into the small business as well. So one of the other things was some alternatives to day services, and things like developing micro-credentials for young people as well. Some of the other programs, like some of the more mainstream programs, becoming more inclusive as well after school. And then housing, and we've been connecting with Michelle and others around housing opportunities for disabled people and accessible housing, and engaging with many organisations to create as many more opportunities as we can there as well. But also, I guess, what are the opportunities for participants to engage in terms of learning more skills and developing more skills towards what planning really looks like for them.
Cool. So incorporating the EGL approach. For us, at the moment, as an EGL service provider, one of our biggest challenge at the moment is finding the balance between consistency, speed, and personalized. So what does that mean? So for us, consistency means that when we deliver the service, it has to be consistent across all board. Speed, that disabled people won't have to wait too long to receive our services, but also personalized when they do receive the services has to be catered to their needs and what they want. I think more importantly, as well as what Tom's been doing as a community, is actually bringing about EGL as more than just a service provider. Again, it's an approach. How do we go about it, making sure that the community is aware of the EGL approach and how they could themselves incorporate that into the work that they do? And as mentioned, some of the challenges and the priorities that we're working on at the moment, things like employment, housing, opportunity for after schools. If service providers start incorporating some of that into the work that they do, wouldn't that be just makes it easier? Because at the moment we have this really cool system, like cool ways of doing things, but actually it takes a community as well to bring the approach to life and ensuring that it's not just us doing all the work, but the approach is the community approach, So anything you want to add to that? That's good. Cool.
So coming back to the principles as promised, in terms of incorporating the principles into research, some of the things we talked about as a team, and I'm sure you're already doing much of this, but some of the ideas we talked about as a team were around self-determination, obviously being led by the voice of disabled people in whānau, but throughout the whole process. So in formulating the research questions and the approach, as well as what will be done with the findings or the outcome. And I guess we practice that self-determination in terms of engaging with people. They opt in the first place to the Enabling Good Lives approach, and they lead what a good life looks like for them. And our engagement is based on how much they are wanting to have that conversation with us and when. In terms of beginning early, one of the things we talked about is no assumptions on who can participate. Obviously, there's some criteria at times, but disability is often a journey of identity for a lot of people, and is how people can be part of that journey along the way and being empowering. Because and one of the ways we do this is often we've developed some learning resources. So for when people are looking at going flatting, for example, what are some of the things they want to talk about with others and consider along the way. So developing some of those resources and sharing them with as many people as possible is one of the ways to try and start that conversation earlier. Person-centered. One of the things we talked about as a team is, I guess, what do people actually get out of it? So not just sharing the nice or the story, but actually what is the point and how can everybody be part of that reciprocal journey and the event of being part of whatever we're researching or engaging on. Ordinary life outcomes. Our team are really passionate about having the conversations around what a good life looks like and really supporting that vision so that people raise the expectations and not just of themselves and their whānau but of others and support each other so that we're all on that journey together. But also that we also have to be realistic about, housing, for example, is an issue for everyone at the moment in Canterbury, and so disabled people, while having additional needs, will still have experienced challenges in that area. Mainstream first, I think for us, the example there was not making assumptions, and so therefore trying things out first and having the opportunity to, say, engage with your local gym. One of the points before was mainstream first doesn't necessarily mean that you do away with day services. Often it will be a combination of both, so people may choose to still attend because they've developed many good relationships and good routines in those areas, but they may look at doing other things like following their passion, like I said before, in terms of an interest and developing that into a small business with a business mentor. So I guess someone more specialised in a particular area rather than that traditional support. We talked about mana enhancing mainly in ways that are meaningful to people in terms of presentation. So when we invite participants in to talk about some of their experiences and some of the things they've been doing, they may present in many different ways that are meaningful to them. And I guess in terms of mana enhancing, for us it's often exploring the ideas in the process, even when you may not think they'll turn out, so because the journey is just as important as the outcome. As a team, we talked about easy to use, mainly around things being well understood and demonstrated back to you, obviously in people's language, but mainly having the opportunity to demonstrate that people have understood what we're trying to convey. And a big part of what we're doing is all about that relationship building and being led by the community. And one of the things that's really important for the Enabling Good Lives approach is that we have a regional leadership group which is led by disabled people in whānau, and they are the ones that I guess reflect on us in terms of our practice as a team, so that we are continuing to follow these principles in practice as well. And so that that relationship building is very much a two-way street, and so is just as valued by us as a team in how we practice as it is for us and how we can support the community. And with that, I might hand over to you and we'll come back for questions. Is that all right?
Yeah. Next, I would like to introduce Emily Timothy, and she is going to talk about some research that has actually been using some of the principles of Enabling Good Lives. So Emily is a clinical researcher with Burwood Academy, as well as wearing a number of other hats, which can do a little bit more talking about, if you like. And the project that she is going to talk about is in relation to stroke navigation and how, I think, that's right. And to talk a little bit more about how this was actually practiced for research projects.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Can't decide whether I want to stand or sit. We might do a combination. So yeah, I'm Emily and I work, as Rebecca says, with a couple of hats on today. So I've been doing some research with the Berwick Academy Trust looking at stroke navigation, which fits really nicely with my other hat as a physiotherapist with de facto order in the community stroke rehab service. So it's been a lovely alignment of interests and something that I've been really, really grateful to be part of. So I'm going to talk about the stroke navigation project, but in relation to enabling good lives principles. So the project we undertook was using a health research activation grant. So that's really all about building relationships and starting conversations about what is important and moving forwards with this particular research idea. So it was all around investigating navigational support after stroke. And I just want to acknowledge the principal investigator was Joe Dealey and Joe Nunnally, and we did a co-design approach, and co-design team were amazing. So I'm hopefully speaking their voices today. So just start with this, ko tu mako me hare tahi tato. So let's do this together. It felt like a really important thing because we very much had a co-design approach and very much blended lots of different voices and ideas together. So hopefully I can share some of that. I'm actually going to sit down. So we started off hearing from people who'd had stroke through a different project, which was looking at return to work after stroke. And as these conversations were being had, people were speaking of this feeling of being unsupported, being unsure about how they should be driving their rehabilitation, which direction their life is going in, and feeling that they were having to navigate and push things themselves. So people said, I'm not sure what I should expect, whether I'll get more rehab at that time or whether they'll just only be responsive, not proactive. Or if there maybe should be something that I'm asking for, but I don't know what to ask for. And that was really common in these interviews on this previous project, that people just didn't know what they didn't know. I think it would have been useful just to have someone who was a name or a contact that if I was struggling, I could get hold of. So when I realised that things had gone wrong, there was no way that I had of reaching out to talk to someone. And again, this was a really common experience of people that they felt really supported initially, and then gradually services would discharge and people suddenly feel really lost and confused and not know which direction to go in. And so we did a secondary analysis of these interviews, and we found that often what dictated how well somebody navigated services and life after stroke was dependent on their or our, people were talking about their family and whānau, their knowledge, their outlook and their supports. So some people were much better placed to be able to navigate and be the driving force for their rehabilitation and getting what they needed in their life after stroke. But other people were not, for a multitude of reasons. And of course, it posed these questions of, is this equitable? Where is the control in this? And could it be better? So that's where we started. So we established a co-design team, basically a team of people who could help support the direction and evolution of the project. The co-design team included researchers, but it also very importantly included people with lived experience of stroke. We specifically recruited people of Māori and Pacifica ethnicity and included their whānau to ensure that their voice was strong. And we also included some voices of stroke service providers, in particular the Stroke Foundation. So the co-design team helped us we looked back over what we'd heard from the previous secondary analysis interviews, and we built on that. We developed a map of what currently seems to be happening for people after stroke, which that map was very, very complicated and confusing, and we then presented that along with the voices we heard at focus groups. Now we had 2 focus groups. One focus group was specifically service providers, so that included people who worked in Te Whaka Order, community organisations and Stroke Foundation. And another focus group was specifically to better understand whānau ora and the whānau ora focus services that were out there. And so from those focus groups, we gained more understanding of what's happening, what could be better, and start getting ideas of how we might be able to move things forwards and improve the experience for people after stroke. And then the kind of finale of the project was a workshop with the co-design team to bring all of the different phases of the project together to establish key principles of what we think would work well in Christchurch. So I've got to say that, but we specifically focused on Otakahi and developed some recommendations of what would be helpful for people moving forwards. So across all phases of the project, we really considered and kept close to the Enabling Good Lives principles and whānau ora principles. So why was this? Well, we know from what Tom said that Enabling Good Lives is evidence-based. It's been shown to be effective and valued by people with disability in helping them with their life. We knew that it was relevant to the people of Aotearoa, but we also really wanted to capture whānau ora. So it's not my purpose today to talk about the differences. There is a lot of overlap in the principles, but just acknowledging that whānau ora comes from Te o Māori perspective, so very much intertwined the Māori world throughout the principles. So we wanted to make sure we're incorporating both sets of principles. So why not just replicate the EGL model? Well, we wanted to make sure we were capturing the diverse nature of the experience that people have after stroke, recognising that there's quite a breadth of experience. And we particularly wanted to better understand the context of what's going on in Otakahi. So you've seen this a couple of times, but just to refresh your mind, so it's at the forefront, these are the core principles of Enabling Good Lives. And I guess just to kind of remind everyone that the idea of Enabling Good Lives is really trying to ensure that we're respecting disabled people and recognising that they can be trusted to take control and make decisions of their life. And all these principles are really important, but that I guess is the kind of background of where EGL came from. So I want to tell you a bit about some of the voices we heard. So with the co-design team, we undertook semi-structured interviews with them and focus groups, which included open questions, but also some kind of probing questions to make sure we were developing understanding of what was going on. And so this included specific questions about some of the Enabling Good Life principles, about where that fitted into people's thoughts of what was happening for people after stroke or themselves after stroke, and how that might be able to enhance their journey. So just one example to talk about that actually still remained an area of contention is about whether navigators or people supporting people after stroke should be stroke specific or whether they should be lifelong. And Tom mentioned about how people could sort of come back to navigators down the track, and there was certainly some people in focus groups who really believed that they shouldn't be defined by their condition, whereas other people felt that they really wanted somebody who was an expert in stroke and that was them. So that is an example where we were really kind of delving in more to the Enabling Good Lives and what we've already heard. So just a few quotes to give some examples of how what people said fits in or echoes some of the Enabling Good Lives principles. So this was a service provider. It's Whananga Tanga and Manaki Tanga and holding space for whānau to navigate. So we will connect, and the more time we spend with people, the more that kai te hono know how to connect those dots, so connectors. So this particular person was a whānau order provider and really kind of helping to explain how relationships were fundamental to giving a good service and supporting people after stroke. So this was actually a whānau member of somebody with stroke. So she says, well, you went, referring to her husband, you went and had physical therapy one day and came back and there was some stroke foundation literature on the bed. And we just knew immediately that if they don't know kanohi ki te kanohi, they won't work for us, so that's face to face. We just knew they weren't going to work for us. It's just like looking at a pair of shoes and knowing that they're not the kind of shoes you'd ever put on. That's what it was like. So for that particular couple, the door closed. You know, they didn't want to speak to anybody from the Stroke Foundation again. Not out, trying to be difficult, but they just knew that wasn't the right service for them. So just understanding that initial connection, it can be really, really important to whether somebody's accepting the service or not. So self-determination, this really could be seen as an overlapping theme. But one person who had a stroke said, it's having those tools to navigate. It's a bit like you're given a map, but you don't know which way's north, and you need your compass and a key to what the things on the map mean. Sometimes it feels like health professionals think they've given you, but they go, oh, here's the map, but they don't provide a guide what the lines mean. And as a healthcare professional, I can really relate to that, but so often, working in the community, we hear people say, oh, nobody told me about fatigue, or no one told me about where I should go for X, Y, or Z. But we know that they have been given that information, but it's not in a digestible way, or it's not at the right time, or they were bombarded, or for whatever reason, it wasn't given a way that empowered that person. And then another service provider talked about promoting self-empowerment skills to enable better life participation. So referred to the Take Charge After Stroke program, which is very much about empowerment and self-determination. But it's not limited to formal programs, and it should be embedded by all rehab staff rather than creating dependency on therapists. So again, coming back to that control aspect, that really our responsibility as service providers is making sure we're giving people the skills they need so that they can navigate their life after stroke. So person-centred came up a lot. So this here is echoes what I said earlier about this kind of tension that came up about whether navigation should be focused on stroke or focused on people. And so this particular quote, the lady said, as soon as you have a specific health condition navigator, then that becomes the focus, which leads into a biomedical focus. So if you have a general navigator who's doing a great job as a tuhono, they won't need the knowledge because of all the knowledge they've taken in and shared. So she was arguing the point that it should be person first, not condition first, and that if connectors are doing this fantastic job of relationship building, they're absorbing and they're connecting you with the right people at the right time. So that maybe Stroke Foundation or whoever. And easy to use, which this person talked about how I think the final thing would be to make sure that the navigational support is not complicated. The easy question, whatever it looks like, whatever the job title is, wherever they sit, is that they need to be kind, a good person to the family, and have some empathy. Kindness and empathy is really, it's everything else can get taught, and the family will teach that person. Sometimes we try and get these amazing big box manuals and really just let it grow. So keep it simple but make it easy to use. So I just want to talk a little bit more about some of the specifics of how we used the Enabling Good Lives principles with our co-design team. So as I already said, it influenced our questioning, where we were trying to really understand what was important to people and what that meant in reality. We analysed our interviews inductively, but we did have that overlay of the principles of Enabling Good Lives in the back of our minds, thinking about how that either aligned or didn't. And then at the final workshop we did, we included, it was quite involved and messy, but we basically printed off all the key themes and all the principles that come up from our analysis and from Enabling Good Lives and Final Order. And we got our co-design team to look at them and prioritise them of what was low, medium, and high priority. And it opened up some brilliant conversations and helped us to kind of crystallise, well, what for people living with stroke in Christchurch was the most important principles. So findings, it's not my purpose today to tell you all the ins and outs of what we found at the Stroke Navigation Project, but I want to give you the kind of overarching principles that came out of it to help you kind of see where Enabling Good Lives fit in. So, the green, darker green, kind of represents the person with stroke and their journey. So at the beginning, having the stroke, and the emphasis initially often being more about rehabilitating well. But recognising as time goes on, there's this kind of fluidity of living well as rehabilitating well. So often people in the early stages of stroke were asking questions and wanting better support of how do I optimise my recovery after stroke, and who do I need and what should I be doing. But there were also blended questions and thoughts right from day one for people after stroke of how am I going to get back to work, how I'm going to look after my children, and I need to know who to talk to and to understand that I'm going to be supported to be able to get back to living well. The red circle represents the principles that relate to whatever navigation system we are looking at. So it includes enhancing the navigation of existing staff and services, so Te Whatu Ora staff, existing navigation services like Stroke Foundation and Final Order, but also guides the principles of if we were to add in additional navigational support, what the key principles would be. And so people wanted it to be holistic. They did not want to be compartmentalised and see one person for one thing and one person for another. They wanted to be seen as a whole. Whanaungatanga was really important, so that building relationships that Tom's already spoken to, but in particular really considering partnerships and this give and take between providers and people with stroke and their whānau. So really recognising this give and take nature of that relationship. Self-determination, so ensuring that we are giving people the skills and trusting that they are able to navigate their life, but they need the support to be able to do that to differing degrees. And that whatever it is, it needs to ensure there's clear pathways for everybody, for consumers. But what became really apparent is that service providers are really confused about who's who, what's what, and how to refer to them, so it's not clear at the moment. And partly that is because of the complexity of stroke, that there isn't one straight line path and complexity of people, but it's also part of the evolution of services that have different pots of money and have come online, and so there's a kind of history to that as well. And then the blue circle around, recognising in all of this is the context of the person, and that whatever navigational support we give to them depends on them. And we can't be making assumptions about who needs navigational support and who doesn't. And there was lots of conversations about gatekeeping across various points of a person's journey. So for instance, somebody who had maybe just an overnight stay at the acute stroke unit, had dodged a bullet because they've had really good medical intervention and were walking out of hospital with invisible signs of stroke, there's an assumption being made, well, they don't need to have any navigational support offered to them because they're doing great. And that's not necessarily true. And equally, somebody who has had a devastating stroke might not want any navigational support. And so everybody should be offered navigational support no matter what. So just coming back to the enabling good lives, so the principles that really came out strongly from enabling good lives was self-determination, option for beginning early, and that those conversations were started really early. Some people might say, no, I don't need navigation right now, I just want to focus on rehab or whatever it is, but there needed to be the option for it. Person-centered, easy to use, and relationship building. And just to kind of point out, mainstream first and ordinary life outcomes didn't feature highly in what people said. Now, that's not to say that they're not important, but just in the conversations we had with our participants, it wasn't something that resonated particularly loudly. And then to the left here, whānau are self-managing and empowered leaders. So this is one of the whānau order principles. Whānau participating in society really came through strongly, and really recognising that whānau know what their whānau needs, and that's an underutilised resource. So the next steps. So as I kind of alluded to at the beginning, this kind of project really is just the beginning. We've kind of found out where the gaps are, what's going well, and there's lots of things that are going well, and there's lots of great resources and work going on, but we want to have more conversations to help improve those connections to enable that more holistic approach and more equitable approach for everybody. So hopefully there might be another funding application, but certainly we're going back to our kind of key stakeholders, our participants, and talking about, well, what next? What does this mean? And keen to hear, you're obviously all coming from different perspectives and backgrounds, but keen to hear if you've got any kind of thoughts and of your own experiences. We will now open up to questions to Tom and I. Some questions?
Apologies, I came in late, so I may have missed something. But the role of navigation, is it navigation or is it advocacy? I see the two things different, and I think they require different skill sets.
Yeah.
And I think some people want advocacy, and advocacy includes navigation through the system, but they don't need the specifics, and some people need navigation support.
Yeah, and definitely they're separate but overlapping, and so having that flexibility within whatever navigational support is offered, and certainly it seems that some people needed kind of, I guess, tweaks to how healthcare professionals were working to empower them and give them the skills and the right information and enabling them to be able to ask the right questions, whereas other people needed much more wraparound support. So yeah, it's both, and I think that's where we need to have conversations about how to support service providers and I guess change that culture and mindset of how people are speaking and working with their patients to empower them, but also not to make an assumption that this person doesn't need either advocacy or navigation.
We find in the spinal world we often have more coaching is involved.
Yeah.
Coaching the individual on how they should be advocating for themselves and supporting them through that process.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Giving people those skills to, know what that is.
And just to add to that, so from our team's perspective, we would be taking that coaching approach. Our connectors would be very much about connecting participants in whānau with advocates for particular situations in their lives. And part of that is to retain that relationship building so that not getting in too deep into a particular issue means they can retain that relationship and I guess develop that a lot further over time. Particularly, an example of that would be participants getting a bit older and relationships with whānau and wanting to move out, or different relationships they're having, and some families and disabled people working through that while the connector was able to maintain that support.
Tom, can I ask a question? It's clarifying. Within Enabling Good Lives, the pilot here, do the participants pay for the connector out of their budget?
They don't, no.
No, so it's a given to everyone regardless.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
It's sort of a combination question, perhaps for both Tom and Nick and Emily. The future EGL, when Waikaha really hits its straps, is not just school leavers, and it's not just it's everybody, so there'll be a real crossover. So adults who suffer from a stroke will become EGL candidates themselves, regardless of their age. Is there any sense of what that might change the landscape for this confused world that is operating?
And it definitely feels like there's an alignment of a lot of different organisations and policies all kind of going in the same direction. So the Stroke Foundation themselves are adopting a more Enabling Good Lives model, and obviously Waikaha are moving in that direction. So hopefully that means that we're going to be the perfect alignment, that everything comes together, that recognising the different sort of expertise and lens that each.
And I think in the big picture, you're right, for all people. And the role of the connector may change, because if people already have existing relationships, they by all means can continue with those rather than, they don't have to engage with the connector in the same way as everyone else. That's very much dependent on the individual.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to this where some people really want the stroke specific support, and some people don't want to be defined by their condition and have a stroke navigator, an arthritis navigator, and whatever other health condition that they might have. So,
Never mind if you've got a few health conditions.
yeah.
I think that it does such a beautiful job conveying the essence of this the Enabling Good Lives principle, and it's really cool to just hear this several years down the line. The ethos behind this comes across really strongly in the messaging.